Welcome to the Grand Electric Archives, a Forever Classic Games show that really dives into a lot of different games and gives us the opportunity to really just kind of think about what we're playing. And this week, I'm joined by our editor and overall fantastic Nintendo dork, Mr. Reese. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a hot minute since we've been on the podcast, so I'm excited to sit down and talk about some stuff, because to be frank, the thing that we're talking about today kind of interrupted our whole establishment.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of got lost in this game for
Yeah,
many hours.
I don't know what it is about this year, but like real recently there's been some just straight up bangers and pretty much all of my favorite franchises. So it was really hard to ignore a lot of these games.
Yeah, there's been a lot of games I've just been completely can't pull myself away from.
Yeah, and so once I'm done with these like three major AAA things, I'm gonna really hit the indie scene hard. There's a lot of little guys I want to talk about.
Lots just releasing, and there hasn't been too many like big disappointments this year so far. Pretty much everything people have been hyped for is usually paid out pretty well for those who are looking forward to it. So that's always good to hear.
Even the game I'm like the most lukewarm on, I've put a lot of time into, and that's I forgot to say this before we started recording, but I've been playing a lot of Diablo 4 with my partner, and she loves it. She's absolutely like into it. She's like level 60 something or whatever, and I'm like level 40 playing a druid. And so we've been having a lot of fun with the co-op aspect specifically. We really like co-op games, and we've been playing that and River City Girls, which is another one I'm going to be talking about because we finished the first one. And now we're like maybe a third of the way through the second one, so there'll be some more like co-op chats for sure.
Yeah,
But
and I heard a lot about the kind of like the way they balanced the Diablo co-op was really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it kind of makes everything feel sort of samey, but it also makes it to where you can just kind of like pick up and play with friends socially. That's the only reason I ever played anything from Blizzard, anyways.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I've been playing a lot of Street Fighter. We just had a big tournament that was like a couple weeks after launch, so we're, a couple months, give or take, for a lot of these games. But today we are talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which, again, really interrupted what we were doing. We were kind of on a roll there for a while. Zelda came out, and then we're all like, ooh, I'm busy. Of course, we've all been very busy. Joe went on a vacation, so some of the editing is on the back burner for a little bit. He had this awesome trip with his daughter, and I'm sure he'll talk about that whenever we sit down for the other show. But yeah, so it's been a wild few months in the game industry. Like, shit is happening.
Definitely a good time to sit down and play some games.
Yeah, finally.
Sometimes hard to pull yourself away from the game to do coverage, but
Yeah.
especially just intimidating when you have a game as big as like Tears of the Kingdom, where it's like I don't
Right.
feel like I'm adequate to really cover it till I've seen so much of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's already so much content out there. Like before literally like the day it comes out, there's already people beating it in like an hour, and there's just content for everything already. It's
What is the current any percent record? I want to look this
I
up
think
while
it's sub an hour, I think already.
we are, as of this recording, so it's divided into two patches. Previous 1.2.0, and the leader there is Gymnast86, which does not surprise me. That individual has done some really stellar work in the Zelda space, and I think Joe's talked to them in the past, because it's a local Minnesota event, so I've been there with him at least once, and he's been there a couple times. And that time is 45 minutes and 28 seconds,
Wow.
which is wild because the ending itself is, for most people, probably an hour and a half, just that last section.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I wonder if you can like we'll come back to that at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah, don't want to go into too much detail, but
Yeah. So the Zelda franchise has really gone through this really interesting kind of evolution since Breath of the Wild. And for context, we are again talking about Tears of the Kingdom. It is a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's something that hasn't happened in quite a while, as far as like the Zelda story continuing from one game to another directly. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's really interesting. And so technically, and I don't know if the hack and slash Warriors of Calamity or whatever it's called, I don't know if that is a like canon story, but it is connected. So we've had like 3 games in this version of Hyrule.
Yeah, it's definitely a big change, but also not. I mean, it's such a weird evolution because it's simultaneously breaking away from Ocarina of Time, but also embracing a lot of what the original Zeldas did.
Mm-hmm. And that original connection is really kind of deep. Like, I played that prototype that they either released to the public or leaked. I don't remember which. But it was like a top-down version of the NES Zelda that just had more interactions. So the way you, like, interacted with fire and that sort of thing. And so that is kind of what they used to prototype, reportedly, in the original Breath of the Wild. And so there's that, like, retro DNA kind of at its core, which I always found really interesting. But personally, I've played all three of these. I've played Breath of the Wild all the way through. I got it launch day for the Switch, and I got the Switch when it came out. And then I played all of Age of Calamity. There's a review on our website for that. There's a review for Breath of the Wild on maroonersrock.com. And there will likely be a review for Tears of the Kingdom by the time you guys listen to this. So I've covered this particular version of Hyrule pretty extensively as far as, like, just reviews. And I gotta say, it's been a pretty interesting ride. But I've been with this franchise, like, pretty much since the Game Boy. Link's Awakening is where I kind of really got into Zelda. It and A Link to the Past. Some friends brought it over on the Super Nintendo. But where are you at with the Zelda series? Is this something that's, like, super important to you?
Yeah, so my first exposure to Zelda was Ocarina of Time. I had a copy on N64. At the time, I was way too young to know how to do anything. Solving the puzzles or getting through a dungeon was beyond me. So I never got very far in it. And I didn't really, I think that kind of just, from a young age, I was kind of turned off the series from that just because I couldn't. Too young to figure it out. It wasn't as simple. And I never really got back into it till I eventually played Breath of the Wild, and I think, or no, actually it was Wind Waker on Wii U, I think was the first time I decided to give it a chance. I really enjoyed Wind Waker, but I didn't feel compelled to just go back through the rest of the catalog, but I played Breath of the Wild day one, and I really enjoyed that, and I bought Tears of the Kingdom day one, so I'm more in the camp of the people that have really mostly new here.
Okay.
Have kind of joined in with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
It doesn't surprise me that you're interested in Wind Waker, because from what me and you have interacted with the past couple years, that seems like a Reese core game to me, like GameCube era, high quality Nintendo, timeless art styles. Like, that seems to be your jam in every sense of the word.
Yeah, Toon Link is the best Link.
I do like playing him in Smash. He's pretty interesting.
Yeah, people can fight me, but I like the Wind Waker art style.
I think a lot of people really appreciate that. Like, whenever it first came out, it was kind of rough because everybody wanted Twilight Princess. And then when Twilight Princess came out, it was like, people liked it, of course. But in hindsight, a lot of people will say that Wind Waker is the better game and it has, like, a more fascinating art style. I think there's merits to both, obviously. But yeah, so we're pretty far in. I mean, Breath of the Wild came out 6 years prior to Tears. And it's basically the same, like, engine and format and art style of Breath of the Wild, so there wasn't a whole lot of change. The main difference between these two games is there's just new mechanics in how you interact with the world, and new characters and plot and that sort of thing. But the actual framework itself, the landscape, most of it is really similar. They're using the same framework and just kind of building upon it.
Yeah, and that's what's really strange is we don't really see that with open worlds is because usually that's the big draw is the new open world. So it was kind of different to hear that we weren't getting that. And I believe we're getting the same thing with like Spider-Man 2, where it's going to be reusing a lot of the same area. And I guess it's always a bit of a worry for a lot of people of what that was going to look like when it came out. And I think it really was that they were looking more to explore the mechanics of what you could do rather than really the exploration. You weren't going to get that. You weren't going to be able to replicate it the way Breath of the Wild did.
Right. And that's the magic to me, in a lot of ways, was kind of gone coming into Tears of the Kingdom, because I just played so much of Breath of the Wild. But it's weird, right? It's one of those games that played it once pretty extensively, all the way through. I did all the plot. I found a lot of the items and did most of the side quests. I wasn't really compelled to come back to it, though, because it was just such a big task. And that's something that I'll get to when we talk to the actual, like, critique of Tears in particular, but I don't know, between the two, if I were to just come back and play for fun, I would come back to Tears before I came back to Breath of the Wild, I think.
Yeah, because with Tears, I feel like it comes down to more of how you explore rather than what you're exploring. And
Hmm.
having now basically explored this area twice, it really is just, I think it's more mechanically interesting to do what Tears of the Kingdom has done. It's just
Right.
added a bunch on top of it. But
So there's a some the major difference here is we have new powers. Link in the very beginning of the game, and we'll drop a spoiler warning when we get to some plot stuff. So don't worry, listener, we got you. But if you have finished the game, you're in for a treat because we're gonna talk about some really interesting aspects. But you have all these new powers. Link loses his hand, Princess Mononoke style, and it's like all damaged up. But the new race, the Zonai, a previous king of Hyrule, his ghost shows up and protects him from Ganondorf's miasma. And Ganondorf, by the way, we find him because Hyrule has like kind of settled. When before it was very like dystopian sort of situation. Everything was very bleak. There was a lot of melancholy to the world. Now it's more hopeful, and the entire like community of Hyrule, the various peoples, are really starting to like settle in, rebuild, and then explore. And this is how we get to the underground section, and that's where we start, right? It's Zelda and Link by Torch, exploring the depths of Hyrule and learning its history, which I find to be a really fascinating framework for everything that happens in Tears. And it's really cool to see like Link and Zelda together for at least that beginning portion. Zelda gets dismissed, so to speak, from the story in a lot of sense. She's always there, but she's not really there. And so I really was kind of bummed this entire time. I was hoping that Link would die, and I would get to play as Zelda. I was like, please, it would be so cool. That didn't happen.
yeah, they definitely got Zelda out of the plot. Well, not out of the plot, obviously,
Yeah.
but they got her out of Link's way, so they have an excuse to just have Link on his own again and just exploring the world. And I feel like that's a very common thing across the game is to get that open gameplay. There's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made, and that's just kind of one of them. Though I wish maybe they could have found a way to at least keep her around a few hours, maybe.
So cool. Oh,
But
I would have
yeah.
loved playing as Zelda. Granted, for those who want to play a non-male character with like more representation, Link is pretty gender fluid in the past couple games, and so you can dress them up however you like. But so once they get down into the cave, they find a mummified Ganondorf, and they're like, "Whoa, who's this cat?" And he's basically Mumra, and so he like pops up, throws out a bunch of evil magic, is restored, and fights and attacks the pair. And so in the process, the Master Sword breaks, which big deal. Everything is ruined. All of your energy, like you watch your hearts get ticked away, which is a pretty interesting way to solve the like power creep, right? And then Ganondorf like upheaves the entire world and breaks off all these ruins and stuff. And so now the sections of Hyrule are like floating in the sky. We have the base level where most things happen still. And then we have that underground level, which is a lot more extensive than we gave it credit for and was not advertised. So when reviewers got a hold of this, they're like, oh no, there's a whole nother game down here.
That was surprising they kept that. I mean, they kept the whole marketing for this game was very close to the chest for a while.
Yeah.
I remember hearing about there was the presentation with Al Numa who showed off like some of the fusion stuff, and that originally apparently wasn't even part of the marketing plan. That was thrown in because they weren't seeing a lot of excitement for the game. They kind of showed very short glimpses and were like, why aren't people excited for this?
They
like,
kind of
well,
seemed
we
like
don't
they
know what
wanted
it
to
is.
bank on like the previous success of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
You really got to tell people what you're doing.
Well, yeah. On one side, definitely, it's a sequel to Breath of the Wild and it's Zelda.
Right.
People have high expectations. You know it's going to sell and it's going to probably be a good game. That's not any doubt. But also at the same time, when you have a game as big as Breath of the Wild and then we aren't seeing as much of it, we really need to know, well, how is this going to kind of one up a game that
Right.
many people consider one of the greatest games of all time?
It was a lot of trepidation there for a while, and I know a lot of us in the journo space was like really excited for it, but we weren't really sure what was going on. And then that presentation you referred to came out, and we were like, "All right, we're in." And so that's kind of where it landed. But anyway, so he gets the arm, and it gives us access to new powers based on the 5 fingers of the hand, and you also get rings that correspond with the champions of this game. And so the main interesting ability that completely changes the game, arguably for the worse in my opinion, but I find it fascinating, is you can now build things by sticking things together using the Ultra Hand, which is a great name because it's an old Nintendo toy, and you just kind of like stick pieces together for things. And so you can build like little robots, you can build vehicles, you can build music boxes. Like people are doing wacky things with this, and that's cool for the longevity of the game. But I don't know if it like I didn't use the building hardly at all personally.
Yeah, so I definitely used it probably for probably the extent the game requires, but I didn't
Yeah.
too often go out of my way to build a crazy contraption just because I found that unless you could really find some super efficient like builds, there wasn't always the most practical use of your time to really go out of your way to
Exactly.
build things.
Yep.
Like there's a little glider with the two fans that everyone online is using. Like I built that because it's
Of
definitely
course.
efficient. But there's a lot of contraptions that make good clips for like Twitter, but they don't really make for the most efficient actual use of your time or all the resources you use to make them.
Precisely. There's a lot about this game that I think is really fascinating, and from for one, from a programming perspective. How the heck did they get all these interactions to work? I have no idea.
Oh
But
yeah,
it's
I mean
cool.
that's where the dev time is. That's why this game took 6 years is getting that ready and
But
working.
personally, most of the new systems I didn't even feel like were worth my effort because it was just not as effective as just walking.
Yeah, it was. There's some vehicles. I feel like vehicles that travel is probably the way I would say you can
Right.
probably benefit most with the building because you can just build a vehicle at any point. But other than that, a lot of the other things are just some traversal,
Hmm.
which really depends. I know. Well, there's auto build. This is
Right.
kind of a few hours in you'll get it. It's not a big spoiler or anything, but they have ways where you can build stuff faster. But yeah, there weren't too many times where I felt like I needed to build something, and there were definitely times where I felt like I'd rather just be able to travel normally rather than have to use it.
I wish I could jump like a foot higher. Link has got the worst jump in any video game I have ever seen. Granted,
Yeah,
he doesn't have a jump button in most of these games, but you know. I
yeah.
miss the Rock's Feather, man, from the Game Boy.
I,
Great jumping item.
it's been a big debate I've seen online if the old Rivali scale from Breath of the Wild, it's just
It's
the
so
instant
much better.
vertical jump. I still miss it. I'll say I'm on the side of I still
Hmm.
miss just having a very instant vertical jump, even
Yep.
if there are other alternatives like you can go through most ceilings now, but I
Right.
like just
The
at any
best
point you
thing
can just
about the
jump
game
high.
is gliding, in my opinion. Gliding and falling, personally. As for the other abilities, I really like the Ascend ability, which is the ability to just go up from a certain point. Like you can only make the jump so far as like height, right? But if you do, you go into that object and you come out the other side of that object. So if you're at the bottom of a mountain and the direct line to the surface is the top of that mountain, you'll go straight through the mountain. And it's awesome.
Yeah.
I
It's
wish
just
there
an
was a descend ability.
yes, definitely. That's another one where just knowing how to program how you that just sounds like, oh, you can go through any ceiling. That sounds like a programming
Yep.
nightmare.
Boundary
Uh,
Breaks explored it. I didn't watch the full episode, but I follow these folks on Twitter and catch pieces of it. But Boundary Breaks, great YouTube channel. They do a lot of discovery, out of bounds, different looking at various creatures and things. And whenever you activate the Ascend ability, it just puts Link in a black box and shuts off everything else. And I assume just calculates the X, Y, and Z position of wherever it's at and makes the calculation based on a terrain map and then throws you up there. I'm assuming. I'm not a programmer, but
yeah,
at least I know a
no
lot of these
idea.
folks. It'd be fascinating to see if somebody could recreate it. But some of the other abilities you get are the fuse ability that you mentioned earlier, and I personally love that. I think that's the coolest thing as far as the abilities that you get. And it's what you do is you just stick things to other things and make a different thing. So you're like stick plus spike ball, mace. I love that. That's so fun.
Yeah, that was probably it fixed a lot of what I had with the weapon durability.
True.
My biggest issue was simply I felt like it was a little too fast.
Hmm.
Not so much that I'm against it breaking, it's more felt like everything just broke a little too quickly that I was going in the menu too often, but with the fuse I can usually fuse at least something like notable to every weapon to make
Right.
it feel like I'm not always going through five weapons every encounter.
When
So
I first encountered Breath of the Wild, I really was under the impression that a basic RPG system to just show you getting stronger in some regard would have really, really fit the format that we have for Breath of the Wild, and I still think that because a lot of the fights, while they are a better reward now, because every fight that you do gives you monster parts, and monster parts can be turned into weapons, they can be turned into elixirs and what have you, and you get a lot of stuff, right, just constantly in this game, and so that's fine. But the issue is like sometimes it's just not worth going in for a fight, and so there's a lot of moments where you're like running around and you're like, oh, there's a bunch of moblins over there. I ain't even gonna mess with them. Like they're not worth my time and my resources.
yeah, and that's really what it comes down to is if you need resources and you have reason to fight, then you might want to go in. But there's plenty of times where if you're stocked up, there's a lot of stuff you can just ignore in the game.
Mm-hmm.
There is some scaling of enemies from my understanding that
Yes.
stuff gets more powerful and you'll get better rewards. And if you open a chest early in the game versus late game, you're more likely to get a better weapon. But I can definitely understand that there's plenty of times where I'm just like, okay, there's something over there. Unless there's like some item I know that I don't have that's going to be there, it's not too much reason to. I'm not going to get XP or anything. There's no reason to really, at least to my knowledge, there's not going to get a whole lot of benefit out of it. Especially once I've already stocked up on a lot of like horns and stuff I can attach to weapons.
Mm-hmm. And as long as you got the things that they're dropping, what's the point? But the best advice that I had for anybody struggling, because this isn't a very easy video game. It's really challenging in a lot of areas. But the best thing you can do starting out is just follow the critical path, hit that first main quest, especially when you first start playing, because it leads you to the paraglider, which you don't start with, as well as a couple other really important abilities. And so if you're like, man, I'm just struggling, hit the main quest for a while, and you'll get most of the things that you would need to traverse the rest of the map. From there, personally, what I did is I went and unlocked all of the towers, and then just went to another tower. And so by the time I was like 3 to 4 hours in, I could travel anywhere on the map, which saved me a ton of time.
Yeah, my experience is pretty similar. As soon as I got off the tutorial island, I was running around. I immediately wanted to start exploring, but obviously realized I didn't have the paraglider, had to go back for that. But yeah, I started going pretty much to towers, the big light in the sky, so I'm like,
Yep.
and that's how you actually get the map filled out. So that's
I'm
kind of how I
an
started.
type player. We've talked about the pillars of players before, I think, on this show. It might have been me and you, but maybe it was me and Joe. But there's different types of players. I absolutely fall into the explorer category. And for the most part, I was just generally hooked on the game loop of seeing what there was to it, especially whenever you first get your hands on this game. You start to see patterns the more you play. But, like, going into caves, finding those funny-looking monkeys, the, like, weird moblins, and discovering, like, what a like looks like in this, all of that was just, it's magical. It's so cool.
Yeah, and they showed you pretty early on. Like, you start in the sky, and you can jump down to the ground. You even see some holes that look like they lead underground. You see so much early on, and I feel like the game kind of holds you along a little too long. That's why I didn't even get the paraglider at first. I felt like it took me so long to get off the initial tutorial island. I'm trying to, and I'm like, okay, you're showing me all this really cool stuff, and I really just want to start looking around, and I felt like it held me back a little too long where I just started running off. And I feel like that's some issues I've seen a lot of other people have, is just there's so much stuff you need to like kind of to play optimally. There's a lot of stuff you need to get early on, and there's just front loaded a lot of information, and it can lead to people not knowing how to do certain things till really late in the game.
Needless to say, those who had the ability to put out guide content, I'm talking your IGNs and such, who like had the game early for guides, they got really good click through, I believe, as far as just website traffic. Because
I definitely watched some
shit,
guides.
Like, where's the paraglider? I'd look that up personally.
Yeah, I didn't know where the paraglider was. I didn't know how to upgrade your battery. That was something I didn't know 60 or so hours in. I think they explain it. I think they explain it early on, but I probably just missed it.
It didn't make much
I was just
sense.
running through. I was
That
running through
Zonai
too much.
robot guy, he just kind of like spouts nouns at you, and I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Well,
And they never explain why you need more battery.
Well, it was a weird thing where it's like you got the Zonite charges, but then he's like, oh, but you can exchange them for Zonite, and then these Zonites can become pure Zonite, and then you go to the refinery and turn them into battery upgrade. And like, just
What?
too many steps. Simplify it.
Yeah, you couldn't have just
You confused me. I'm in the first hour of the game.
these things for more battery. Dude, my battery is like not even 2 bars. Because it takes so many of those things. I had like 900 and got like this much battery. And I'm like, heck with this. I'm done. I don't care about my battery life. And that's
once I started exploring a lot more after like the main game, I upgraded. I got my battery fully upgraded, and you can fly pretty far and do a lot of stuff. It's definitely worth it if you're going to start going for late game or just kind of if you're really looking to complete the game, you'll want that.
Someone has far more patience than I do, because I cannot imagine doing the completionist run of this game. I didn't even do the shrines for most of them. Here's the funny thing. Gina was interested in this game, my partner, and she was like, well, I'll try it. And then it got to the point where she's like, I don't want to, it's too hard. Everything kills you in one hit. And I'm like, all right, well, do you want to just play on my file? And she loved the shrines and the puzzles. I'm like, do you want to just do my shrines? I don't like doing them. I think they're annoying most of the time. And so the trick is passing the game off when you're bored and having somebody else farm your stuff for you. So I didn't even do most of the shrines personally. I had Gina do them, or at least she wanted to do them. And that worked for me. I had all sorts of hearts and stamina and stuff.
Yeah, and that's just something that's kind of interesting about how the game does difficulty, is because I feel like it definitely is. It's probably more difficult than any other point at the beginning, and it drops off.
Which I disagree with wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and it's kind of this weird idea where you could maybe argue, oh, well, you're supposed to play the game differently in the beginning. You're supposed to avoid pretty much everything, but it definitely is this point where you're dying a ton at the beginning, and then you kind of level off to this point where probably in the second half of the game I died maybe just rarely, if at all, versus the first half where it was dying to everything. And it's a very weird way to balance difficulty.
This is why I think an RPG, like a really basic-ass RPG system, would do wonders for this particular framework, because like we're saying, it's so difficult in the beginning for no reason. Like, they didn't have to make everything kill you in one hit, but they chose to, which you would argue would be for adaptability's sake, of like, oh, find different solutions. But most of the time...
but then it's weird, because if they teach you all these adaptability, and then pretty later in the game, you don't have to do any of that anymore. Once you have your weapons, then it's always just pretty standard combat.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches, and this is what I found out playing the tutorial area, which, like I said, took me a while. There's like a rock golem guy that you fight early on, and I discovered that I could just grab him with the Ultra Hand and take his little core and like move it, and he would fall apart, which is great. But then you still gotta hit him, and I didn't have any weapons. And so I got stuck on that platform for a while. I didn't know how to get off of that platform. Turns out you gotta just jump and hope you hit water. But it was a long time before I could just get off the damn platform.
Yeah,
they really hamstring you in the beginning, man.
Yeah, it feels bizarre simply because there's a sequel to Breath of the Wild that they felt the need to really do this whole thing, and they even do it note for note. You have a like ghost of an old ancient Hyrule king.
Yep.
Kind of guide you through like 4 shrines to get you every power, and then you leave this island and go explore the world. And I feel like that didn't need to be beat for beat. Definitely understand that these powers are probably a lot more complex than Breath of the Wild, so it makes sense that there's more learning curve. If I didn't have more time with Ultra Hand, I probably would be a little confused, but there's also so much in the world and so many shrines that do tutorial stuff that I feel like can probably just get rid of it. I feel like you could almost just get rid of the tutorial entirely and just start the game.
There's so much bloat to Tears of the Kingdom, to the point where it's so big and so... It's not obtuse, in a way. Some systems are obtuse, as far as, like, how you come into them naturally. And that's the exploration, the discovery aspect of Tears of the Kingdom is really fun. But it's like the game doesn't want you to play it for a really long time.
Yeah.
But, right. So Tears of the Kingdom is probably not for everybody as far as like a pure gameplay perspective. And I would say that Breath of the Wild is the better video game, hands down, personally. Like, I gave Breath of the Wild a 10. I still think it's probably in, like, a 9 or a 10. And if I were to give a number to tiers, it'd be closer to the 7 or 8. Like, I just didn't like it as much as Breath of the Wild. There are parts of it that I'll get to when we hit the spoiler section that I think are really memorable and interesting and cool. But from gameplay perspective, I think Breath of the Wild is the better video game.
Okay, that's interesting. I've still, despite it's very weird because I have so many different like grievances with the game, like design and different aspects, but I still just think the game I couldn't stop playing it. Like I still think this is
me too.
Incredible game. So I feel like I like it more than Breath of the Wild because I feel like it adds on top of Breath of the Wild, but it doesn't fix a lot of the issues I had with Breath of the Wild. It more builds its own thing on top of it while just kind of saying, oh, well, that was an issue in Breath of the Wild, but we want to do this stuff right now, so we don't really want to worry about these things. And that's kind of thing where I feel like there's more stuff, so I feel like it's overall better, but at the same time, they didn't exactly fix a lot of what I wanted to be changed.
Personally, I think Breath of the Wild is a more cohesive experience, but even it also doesn't respect player time. Like, I think that the fact that you have to get 4 shrines to get 1 heart is stupid, considering there's, like, 100 of these things, and you divide that between that and your stamina, but even still, 4, like, 20-minute puzzles, if you're good, to get 1 little tick on your stamina that'll maybe last you another second. That doesn't seem worth it to me, which is why I also didn't increase my stamina and stuff beyond needing the Master Sword in the original game. But let's talk less about the gameplay and mechanics and get into just kind of the Zelda-ness of it all, the visual design, the music, and the music specifically. Did you do all the Great Fairy quests?
No, I don't think I got any of the Great Fairies out of their, like the flower buds.
They're really handy because they upgrade your armor, and armor, I think, is the most valuable thing in the entire game as far as, like, items that are worth your time. And the cool thing about Tears of the Kingdom, and this is how I discovered this, is I was in the very bottom right of the map, I was like, oh, there's an island. The other thing, too, is if you're familiar with Breath of the Wild, you kind of know where things are generally, because I was like, oh, I know there's Kakariko Village over here, I'm gonna head that way, and it worked. But so I went on that island and found a hole, ended up in the bottom, fought this really weird Colosseum that kept weirdly saving every time I died to a group, so I eventually just kind of muscled through it, and I opened the chest, and I got Midna's hat, and I'm like, okay, I didn't know that this kind of stuff was in this game. Now I'm interested, because I like the retro stuff. So that incentivized me to explore a little more because I knew these cool armor pieces were hiding about, and there's a bunch of them. So I think that's the most worthwhile thing, and it also harkens back to a lot of the classic Zelda stuff, which is really, really cool in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Midna's Hat was also the first, like, retro Zelda thing I found, so.
Yeah.
Pretty much same experience. Yeah, it's a neat kind of way to incorporate some fan service, but also kind of make sense when it's kind of like buried underneath everything else. But.
And that might be one of the few guides, like, for us that might be worth the, like, effort of doing, but man, I would just, like, figure out what's out there and figure out how we can portray that information a little better. But it's just, there's so much stuff in this. But as far as, like, does the game feel like Zelda? Absolutely. Like, the music is incredible in this one. I really like the Breath of the Wild music, but this one, a lot of the themes harken back to other tracks, and it's breathtaking composition in my opinion.
Don't want to spoil it. The boss music later in the Air Temple boss is amazing. One.
Yeah, and the bosses are all really cool. This is a weakness of Breath of the Wild, is last time you fought different aspects of Ganon, the Calamity. In this one, you fight actual, like, creatures. And they're all really interesting and cool. Yeah,
they're all very different, and you always use the different abilities for each one of them, and they all kind of just have their completely own feel.
Yeah. I really like the Air Temple one just because it feels like an action scene, because you don't really need anything.
Yeah.
You slow down time, you shoot some spots. Sometimes you can dive straight through the little glass weaknesses or whatever on the monster. It's like this big snake thing. And so it's a cool scene. And there's a lot of that in Zelda. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and break the spoiler thing here. We're going to talk about plot spoilers, character spoilers, and creature spoilers and item spoilers. So if there's anything that you're like, man, I wish I could just go into this myself, by all means, come back to us, bookmark that little episode. We'll be here. And there's other things that we talk about in different things. But so the characters in this, I think, are on one hand really interesting because they are oftentimes like the grown-up versions, because there's a time jump between these two games. And so some characters you see when they're real little, like story-driven characters, and then you see them as like teenagers or young adults. Or they're rebuilding a community. Like Terrytown has got its own new vibe. It's got all these railways that they've built, and people are like really flourishing there. And that was like a really fascinating side quest where you're like building a community out of nothing. And so that was my favorite part about just the world building of everything. Is it's a really cohesive world. There are some inconsistencies, I think, if you really dig deep, as far as what characters are where and, you know, what they say and what they talk about. But generally, I really like just the setting of Hyrule this time around, from the different types of people that were inhabiting the space.
Yeah, it's definitely rewarding for those who really went the extra mile and did a lot more of the side quests in Breath of the Wild. I didn't do as many of them. I pretty much focused on shrines and then kind of did the main story. Definitely interesting because we've never even had that from a Zelda game, from my knowledge. Is just really continuing the story of a lot of the characters outside of like the main three. So
it was really cool and rewarding for somebody who played through Breath of, like if you're the type of person who's like, I've never played either of these games, I personally still think it's worth it, especially if you're somebody who's got more patience, somebody like Reese who might do a lot of these shrines. Play through both of them and go through a lot of the side quests and the main quests, because I think together these games pair really well from a narrative perspective.
yeah, I think Breath of the Wild still has some of its own strength, and
It does.
even I feel like just because it's more expansive doesn't mean that there's nothing worthwhile going back to, because I feel like especially if you didn't play Breath of the Wild, this game might be even more overwhelming. I feel like having that kind of scaled back world with what I would say is probably simpler powers is probably worth going through first.
The thing that bothered me about this time around is, I mean, this was the case in the original game too, is that the champion scenes, they all kind of fit a particular formula, and they do this because they don't know what order you're going to do them in.
Yeah.
But even just changing up the way the scenes are like composed a time or two would have been very much appreciated, because they go through the same shit.
It's really bizarre because a lot of these events, these are in the past, so it's not an issue of, oh, well, this doesn't work chronologically, but all these characters are telling this about the past, so why can't you have it so each character explains either a different part or like the next chapter where, I already did 2 temples, so this third guy should not be telling me the exact same story. He should be, well, this is what happened next.
Right. They could have structured the plot and just have it be a voiceover, right? And just change up who reads the thing as far as like the champion spirit, because there's 3 sets of champions in the Hyrule chronology currently. There's the ones we see in Breath of the Wild, so like Urbosa, the other ones. Urbosa's the one that I liked the most. And then we have the new ones, so like the little Rito guy, you have the smaller Gerudo, and then the other ones I didn't really jam with these champions.
Tulin, Riju, Yunobo, and Sidon.
Sidon I liked. Okay, so I really liked Sidon because he was in the first one. So there's those 2 sets of champions, and then there's this third set of champions that I don't think we get the names of, but maybe we do, that are in the distant past, because a lot of this game's plot happens in the distant past when Hyrule was developed by the Zonite guy, who's really cool, and then his wife, who's a Hylian, the like elf type people. And so it's like the beginning of the Hyrule Kingdom. And so in the plot, in the story, and this is what I was thinking, because they don't tell you this outright for a long time, is that whenever you're attacked by Ganondorf and you lose the Master Sword in the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda is sent to the past, like the distant past, and so she is interacting with that Zonite King. And so there's a whole plot that we'll get to when we talk about the end of this game. But the whole framework of this entire thing is that there's like this B plot that's like really interesting, and it's Zelda like trying her best and being like, I'm like 400 years in the past or whatever. How am I going to get the Master Sword back to Link? And who are these people and why were they fighting? And this is where you get a little bit of the flavor of Ganondorf, but I didn't really vibe with his motivation. He kind of just seemed like a pissed off dude to me. Aside from the one line where he's like, we live in the deserts and we're not supposed to live in the deserts. There's far better land for us, Gerudo, or something.
Yeah, I really wish they would have developed him more outside of. I remember at the very end of the game, he's just like, "Oh man, these guys love peace. I hate that." I'm
Yeah.
like, okay.
He's just Mumra. He's sexy Mumra.
I'm like, you don't have any other motivation.
He's a Thundercat villain, man. Like
I'm like,
that's the big unfortunate piece because I believe Ganondorf gets a lot of characterization in both Twilight Princess and Wind Waker.
yeah,
And Ganondorf is a fascinating character. He's the one male in a female race or species or whatever you want to call it. And so he's like already got a leg up and has an interest because every 1,000 or however many years a man is born, and that's a big deal. But in this, we get maybe one line. Maybe there's some like contextual pieces for Ganondorf that I just didn't see. But as far as the memory cutscenes that you watch, I watch them in order, and the cutscenes that you get through the main quest line, Ganondorf's motivation is just kind of he's mad.
yeah, pretty much. He's pretty much mad. Wants to, I guess, just make the world. He wants to be the ruler of the world, which
Yep.
I guess is
Fair
fine. That's the plot of so many villains, but
Yep.
I just feel like you could have done a lot more, and you don't just give him something. It could be a throwaway line of what he wants to do with the world or why he wants it this way, but
It could have been early Hylian expansion and like the like new kingness of the Zonai and the Hylians, where they're just like, oh, we're gonna expand, and they in the process like encroach on other lands and really like bother the Gerudo and have a little war or something. Like that could have been the motivation for Ganondorf. There's so many ways you could have taken it, but they just don't do anything with him. He's just a bad guy, and he's such an exceptionally designed Ganondorf.
yeah, it's
He's
designed,
awesome.
the voice acting. I liked everything they presented with him. I just wish they did a little more with him. And
That's
you
something
really don't see him. You don't
Right.
see him much outside of the past. He never.
The beginning,
Him and Link don't
the
have.
memories, and the end.
Him and Link have like 2 scenes together. I'm like, that's disappointing. It's kind of just.
He could have been so much cooler.
It's like the whole big dynamic. You're working this whole game to kind of defeat this guy that you don't really get to see much about, and you don't really get to hear him say much about Link other than that he kind of sucks, and he's like, yeah.
It was a better villain when we didn't know anything about it, and it was just an evil presence. Because that presence is always there, which is what you get in this game. It's just we know who the presence is, and we never get to learn anything else about them. They're just a bad guy. When before, it was like an eldritch being that its whole purpose was chaos, and it's like, ooh, that's scary.
Yeah, and
Meanwhile, this is a guy.
I'm still confused how that ties. Did they ever explain that?
They didn't do a very good job.
There's just Calamity Ganon, and
Right.
that was coexisting while humanoid Ganon is
So the theory
rebuilding
is that
under the castle.
Calamity Ganon was a manifestation of the magic that was seeping out of Ganon, who was sealed in the underground.
Okay.
And so that entity, that spirit, that residual bad juju, just kind of flowed out and manifested as Calamity Ganon, and also made monsters, I guess. And then whenever he gets out, he does it again, but this time hotter. And you mentioned this earlier, but the voice acting in this game and the last game are exceptional. They're very well delivered lines for the most part, and they really sell it whenever they choose to talk, which isn't often. But when they do, it's great.
Yeah, it can be mixed. Sometimes it's not always the greatest delivery, but I think it's good for what it's trying to do. I'm not super. It's not the kind of game where I'm completely taken out of it if the voice acting isn't.
Right.
I mean, for so long we didn't even have voice acting in Zelda.
I think that they should just outright say that Link is mute and just roll with that. If they're gonna have him as a non-verbal character, I think they should just lean into it and be like, he's a mute. And we get around that, and everybody knows that in the world, rather than this like assumed conversation that they write around a lot. I don't like that. I think that's kind of a weird way to write things if you're not going to have voice acting.
Yeah, I can see it being an issue with how they write the story if he doesn't directly kind of communicate a lot of side quests and stuff. He has to at least, even if it's just an animation, you have to kind of
Right.
story wise, it wouldn't make sense if he doesn't say anything to them and they like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but
If
it
he
would
couldn't
be
say
nice
anything.
if at least some of the main characters, like even when Zelda's interacting with Link, it'd be nice if she acknowledged that, like, oh, he doesn't speak much. That's totally okay. But regardless,
I think it's actually kind of funny. There are a few times where they're just like, what do you think, Link? You know what? Actually, no. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Doesn't say anything. They're
that's
just like,
true. The way
oh,
they
I
write
totally
around
get
it's
what you
kinda
mean.
fun. I like the character who's the journalist, the Rito guy. He's really funny. I wish he talked. He'd have a goofy voice.
I don't know if I met that character.
He is in the stables, and I did a lot of exploring and basically went to anything that had some sort of visual representation on the landscape. And so I visited a lot of stables and took a lot of naps and heard about the horse god and didn't do anything with that information. But there's a lot of cool, like, lore stuff in here. Like, you can find the horse god. You can find, the Master Sword. I found it kind of naturally because I'm like, I bet you it's in the Korok village. And now it's time to talk about the end of the game because that ties in directly to this. But generally, playing Zelda was, like, really enthralling. The gameplay loop is really addictive. And so I was enthralled enraptured in the entire process. I wish it respected my time a little better. I didn't interact with the building hardly at all, and I didn't do much horse riding because I would ride 30 feet and be like, oh, the thing that I want to get to, I now have to get off the horse to get. So what's the point? Why I go through the effort of summoning the horse? And it would be different if you clicked a button and the horse showed up. I'd be fine with that. I'd ride the horse everywhere. But the fact that you have to, like, be in the general vicinity of a horse, or you have to summon it from a stable, which is, like, all these different dialogue boxes, and are you sure? Do you want to put a little saddle on it?
Yeah, and I'm sure it's definitely sounded like we've ragged on the game quite a bit, but I feel like a lot of that reason isn't that the game's bad. No, it's a great game. It's more that a lot of the stuff that's really good about it that makes it fantastic is very simple. The exploration is fun. Mm-hmm. Going around is fun. At least for me, I like the shrines. I like a lot of the puzzles and a lot of stuff like that.
Clever, yeah.
It's a lot of the simpler stuff where it's when you get into the more nitty gritty details that you can maybe find a lot to complain about. But it's why it's so hard to get me to stop playing the game is because there's just a lot of simple dopamine going into my brain when I'm finding different stuff, and it's a lot of fun. Man. It does what it needs to do. It's a game. It's being fun, but there's definitely a lot of issues on top of it that can.
I personally hope that we get another linear Zelda that's more traditional, but who knows? Who knows where we're going with this?
Yeah,
we sure need a Switch too. That Goron village.
I would definitely like to see them try to kind of what they would do now if they kind of went back to a linear 3D Zelda, but take some lessons they've learned from these games.
Oh, for sure. Mm-hmm.
I feel like you can't. Especially after this game, I think this kind of went to the extent of how far you should push it with like the 3 levels of the map. Right. I feel like if you just say let's go bigger, I feel like you're gonna. It's Zelda. I feel like if you follow Master Koga into space, I feel like there's just you need to reel it in. Too. I feel like you need to reel it in.
Yeah.
Especially if you're rebooting or not using the same engine. This game is only possible because it's basically a 12 years in the making game.
Right. But as far as, like, what makes this game stand out, as far as the test of time and what people are going to remember it by, it's those last sections. So you do the 4 main shrines, and then I was fully prepared. I'm like, all right, time to end the game. Here we go. I go and I fight Ganondorf, who summons a bunch of phantoms, and I'm like, cool, his next phase, he's gonna turn into a bigger guy, and I'm gonna beat his ass, and I'm done. And then the game's like, haha, no, you want to do another dungeon, but this time underground? And so I went and did that, and it's a pretty cool little section. You build a robot, it inhabits the spirit of another Zonai, and that's all well and good, and then you get into the actual, like, ending plot of this game. But before you do any of that, and I'm glad that I talked to fellow writer and also podcast aficionado, Justin Wood, about this. I was like, hey, I think I'm ready to finish the game. Is there anything I really need to do? Because I know you've played this more than me. And he said, you really should go and do the memory cutscenes. And I also recommend doing this. because it gives you most of the plot for what's going on. So basically what happens is Zelda is in the past, and she's like, I gotta figure out a way to get this to Link in the present. And they talk about, like, oh, the sealing stones, or whatever the stones are called, those secret stones, I think.
The Tears of the Kingdom?
Sure. The Tears of the Kingdom. If you swallow one, you turn into an immortal dragon, but you can't turn back. And so they just kind of tell you that. And I was like, oh, is that how Zelda gets back to our time? Does she, like, turn into a dragon? And she does, because everybody is slaughtered by Ganondorf, and she swallows the thing, turns into a dragon, and then come to find out, that's the dragon that's just flying around in the map, and it's so cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool reveal overall, and the fact that it was kind of just there from the beginning. I believe even when you first, like, are going to leave the Great Sky Island, the dragon that kind of goes through the clouds and breaks that opening, that's Zelda. So you see her, like, in the first, like, hour or two in the game, and you don't know it's her.
It's great. It's so cool. That whole reveal was really good.
It's a great twist.
And so you discover this in the plot, and by the time you see that last cutscene, you're like, oh. And if you, from there, try to go get the Master Sword, if you end up in the Korok Woods, the Great Tree will kind of, like, hint at this and be like, oh, I think I know where the sword is. And it points to the dragon, which, if you don't know that's Zelda, is just like, oh, the dragon has it. Cool. I don't know how that got there, but all right. But then once you realize, like, that whole time, Zelda has existed. She's just been immortal, and so she lives for 400 years or however long it is. Like, it's tragic. It's cool. It's a fascinating way to tie it all together. It provides more narrative weight to the dragons, which are already just impressive and cool in the original game. And so you, like, get the Master Sword out of the dragon's head, and you restore it, and then you go and fight Ganondorf with the Master Sword again. And then in the plot, you're beating the hell out of Ganondorf. He summons all his monsters, and you're, like, in the very center of evil, basically. And he's like, more goblins, scarier goblins, here's 50 goblins, or whatever. And so you and the champions who you can actually, like, have a little party roaming around, that instead of their ghosts this time, they physically show up, because they manifest as phantoms when you're just out in the overworld, which is interesting and cool. You have a little troop, and you can turn them on and off if you don't want them. Sometimes you don't. But, so it's like, it feels like this big camaraderie, like everybody's getting together and we're kicking down the door and we're fighting Ganon. And then when he gets beat, he grabs the sealing stone that he had stolen from, like, Queen Hylia and eats it. And I was like, oh shit. So he becomes an immortal dragon and busts out of the ground, and he's like one of those big long type dragons, if you've never seen these things. And it's incredible. The whole, like, final moments of this game are just so cool.
Yeah, they take the twist that you already kind of saw, and then somehow still kind of, you feel dumb afterwards, because you're like, oh, well, obviously that's what was going to happen, because Zelda took the stone, obviously Ganon's going to do the same. It just didn't even occur to me that could happen.
Yeah, I had completely forgotten, but as soon as he, like, pulled it off his head and looked at it, I was like, oh, that's really cool. It's simple. It's very simple storytelling, but it was effective, and I really enjoyed it.
And it plays kind of into the logo, I believe, where it's the two dragons kind of eating the tails, the two dragons, Zelda and Ganondorf. So that's been in the logo too. So
that's really cool. Yeah, it provides a lot of, like, visual cohesiveness to the entire design, I think. And then, like, the teardrops, it all kind of comes together in that moment. And it's just a really fantastic ending. Zelda is restored, thankfully. The relationship would have got a little weird, but hard to make that one work. But the way that, like, you have this big triumphant action scene, which is similar in Breath of the Wild, where, you know, you fight Beast Ganon as a giant boar, and it was really cool. But it wasn't really all that challenging. It was just kind of a set piece, right? The challenging part is the sword duel with Ganon right before that, and the Phantom Beast or whatever. But like,
that's
the whole thing,
really...
it worked, like, programming wise, because you were, like, falling, and then Zelda would automatically come pick you up if you got too low. Like, it just worked, and it was cool, and the music was great, and I will never forget that scene of Ganon as a dragon fighting Zelda as a dragon, and Link hacking away at it. Like, it was incredible.
Yeah, it definitely followed what Breath of the Wild kind of did with, you have the first like challenging battle. This is the actual thing it's going to test if you really learned all your stuff and really
And have
grown.
prepared.
It's your final challenge, and then the
Yeah.
other battle is more about the spectacle. I wish it would have been a little bit more. It's still technically impressive that you can
Hmm.
even do what they're doing on the Switch with the dragon picking you up in this giant battle in the sky. Like, it's still technically impressive. I wish there would have just been a little bit more engaging gameplay wise, because you do dive down, kind of hit the weak point one, then go to the next one. I just
Yeah.
wish there would have been something a little more cinematic, because I feel like after a minute or two, the spectacle kind of wears off.
Agreed.
But
The- it's a really interesting way to take the story and to kind of reframe like what a final boss in Zelda looks like. And so overall, I thought it was really fun. It's definitely one of the most memorable Zelda bosses of all time.
oh, definitely.
Is it the best? I don't
I
think
don't.
so.
I haven't played all of them, so I can't say.
One of the better
But
ones is you get a Ganondorf fight in Twilight Princess that is just it's so cool. But you can also cheese it in like the funniest way. But it and the Ganondorf fight in Wind Waker is also really really good. Generally, I think is a great like pin in the overall tapestry that has been the Legend of Zelda. I really love the visual design, and the music I mentioned before is just great. And who knows if I'll come back to revisit this one, but I sure am glad that I like put in the time and played through it as a fan of this franchise and just as somebody who likes video games generally.
yeah, it's not a game I expect I'll probably jump back into. I
Hmm.
put in, I think it was like 150 hours, so I definitely put
Yeah,
a good amount of time into it. I definitely enjoyed my time with it. But yeah, I don't think it's the game you really feel the need to dive back into once you've kind of gotten your fill.
hmm,
Depends. Just feel like a lot of people get a lot of different mileage out of it.
right.
How much do you really want to explore? How much of this do you find interesting? How much are you compelled to keep doing? It's completely self driven.
Yeah. And so with that, I think the last thing that we can just kind of wrap up our chat here is what is what is something that you would really like to see in either another one of these or a DLC pack, or what do you think would just really kind of like improve the game for you?
I, from a story perspective, I'd like there to be something that Link feels like he's having a direct effect on, or something that's being changed in the world over time. Because both the game's stories revolve in like the past events,
Hmm.
and you're kind of just in your current state of Hyrule. And in this game, another disappointment with Ganondorf. Obviously, there weren't many things that he was directly affecting on the surface to like counter what Link was doing. So something where you've reached a certain point in the game and maybe the whole map looks something is completely different the map that's not going to go back to normal. Something like that where it feels like the world is changing while you kind of adventure.
It'd be interesting if they released like a DLC pack or something that's like the next chapter or whatever, and the game like based on the quests that you have done would change the actual landscape. So for example, if you did X amount of quests in the Gerudo village is now this big and looks like this and has these people, and that you could do some toggle switches to kind of determine what is changing. But I think that would be really interesting. I do think we either need some sort of like extra chapter where you play as Zelda. I think would be sweet if you played in the past. That would be incredible. Or give some additional context to Ganondorf just to kind of like make this a little more cohesive. But generally, I think just a couple ways that they could improve the gameplay is something to the effect of instant traversal, being able to summon like a robotic horse or bring back the motorcycle that they added in the other one. It would be sweet to see like just some additional things that made the game easier to play more of, so to speak. Maybe some different accessibility options. We didn't even talk about that. There's like no way currently that I know to just change your button format, and that sucks.
Yeah, the controls are a little.
They're finicky.
They took time. They took time for me to get used to. The menuing is
I
can
don't
be
like the menu
confusing
that
between
much.
switching shields, switching swords, different arrows. A lot of that
Switching
stuff
bows.
is it feels more complex than it needs to be.
Yeah, I wish there was a
But
faster way to cook.
yeah, instead of
That's
cooking
annoying.
individually. See,
So
it really does come down to a lot of the little things.
right, if they had some sort of gameplay enhancement, I think those are the sort of things that I would really want. Like even something simple as remapping the controls would go incredibly. Performance enhancements would be awesome because, like I mentioned earlier, the Goron village or temple is a really cool concept that I just did not engage in because the performance was so shitty. So I just climbed everything. I didn't even bother trying to do any of the puzzle solving. I just weaseled my way up different areas, which worked, thankfully. But if we end up getting that like Switch 2 sometime soon, I do hope there's like kind of like how the PS4, whenever you played a PS5 game, or whenever you're on a PS5 and play a PS4 game, there would be some enhancements that just take advantage of the PS5 hardware. I do hope we get something like that for whatever happens into the Switch. Because ultimately, I just want another handheld that does exactly what the Switch does, but is better. That's it.
Yeah, let's upgrade from the 2015 chip to the 2019 chip.
Right, yeah. Which
Upgrade.
that's
Let's upgrade to be just slightly less far behind.
thanks to all of these court documents, just unearthing all these like trade secrets in the game industry as far as the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which I wouldn't want to buy personally, but they got great IP, so I get it. They are uncovering little things like apparently the Switch 2 is rumored. Microsoft knows about it, and it's going to be as powerful as a PS4, and I kind of wish it was a little better than that, if that's true. I don't know, man. Somebody's going to make, and I think it might even be Valve, if they just made another Steam Deck, but it was 1080p, and everything ran at 60 frames, it would completely annihilate, like, a lot of things for me, because I love the framework of it. We'll do an episode on hardware, maybe.
Yeah.
And we've definitely talked about the Steam Deck in the past on the other show.
Switch will continue to be the hardware I buy for
Yeah.
the Nintendo games, and if I'm buying third party, if it's on PS5, I'm
Right.
going to get it for PS5 typically, because the handheld part of it isn't huge for me. So
I do hope that we start getting, like, emulation for the Switch is already totally cool and fine and working in a lot of aspects. But I love this console's library, just the options that it has. All these, like, first-party Nintendo games have been really stellar and have reinvented a lot of franchises for the better. We're going to get Mario Wonder here pretty soon, which hopefully will do something similar to the 2D Mario gaming that Breath of the Wild did for Zelda and 3D gaming.
we can hope. It still looks in the same, but I don't think it's going to completely revolutionize
Sure.
it. But I'm just glad to see it's not using the same art style, and it looks like
True.
they're kind of breaking the very grid-based formula into really just letting it feel more free flow.
Yeah.
Which is basically all I wanted for 2D Mario to do.
But I think overall, like, this is another flagship awesome release for Nintendo. It sold 10 million copies pretty much immediately, like over a weekend. And it continues to sell like hotcakes because everybody wants to see, what Linky Dinky D is up to. But generally, it's a positive experience that has some caveats. But I think we can both honestly recommend Tears of the Kingdom to most people. And there's a lot of great things to explore in the Zelda franchise. So if you're like, man, I really like these, there's a bunch of great games out there that you can find. And there are plenty of options to play on the Switch, like Link to the Past through the SNES systems, and some of the Game Boy games, I believe, are available now. But do you have any final thoughts about Tears of the Kingdom before we wrap up here today, bud?
I think we laid a lot of it out on the table. It's a very good game. Has many issues because it's such a wide-scoped game. There's so many little holes you can poke in it, but it's overall a very good game. I think it is definitely expands on a lot of Breath of the Wild. Doesn't always fix a lot of what Breath of the Wild did wrong, but it's more of a good thing. So if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild at all, you probably have already played it. If you're looking for an open world game that you can just probably spend tons of hours into and could pretty much pick up, there's so much stuff you can do in a short period of time. If you just want to pick it up for 10 minutes and do something, it's a good relaxing game for that. At least when you're not getting one hit by enemies. But
100%.
It's a good game.
There's a lot of things you can just kick back for 20 minutes and be like, I'm going to do a shrine. And that's great for people that play in between work breaks or whatever. Super cool. But yeah, I think regardless, both games deserve their own spot in the shelves here at the Grand Electric Archives. and there's a reason these games are selling so well. They are bona fide classics, in my opinion. They will be remembered. People will enjoy them in the future, hopefully. And that's another spot on the shelf has been filled. But all right, so next time on the Grand Electric Archives, I think we'll either jump into maybe Tunic and kind of keep this Zelda-style conversation rolling. There's also some whispers about a Final Fantasy 16 episode, and then we're also looking at things like Final Fantasy 9, Symphony of the Night. Mega Man 2, I think we might want to move around because I played it and wasn't enjoying it as much as I remembered. So maybe we'll find another Mega Man title to like collectively sit down and play. But if you do like this podcast and this format, please let us know. You can always hit us up at contact@foreverclassicgames.com, and that last piece there is a great place to get clutter-free games media articles, as well as reviews, features. We've got that YouTube channel. We're really starting to we're so close. We're just a little bit more, and we'll be able to monetize that thing, and it will be one of the few revenue streams that hopefully we can rely on and start elevating ourselves here at the company. And so if you like gameplay videos, voiced over reviews, we've got some other ideas that we're kicking around, so things will expand in the future, I'm sure. And we've got some streams that are coming up here pretty soon, so some fighting game stuff will be available here on both the YouTube channel and then on the Twitch channel if you're watching it live. I think the 29th of June is going to be our next one, and it should be some pretty awesome FGC representation here in Minnesota. But yeah, Reese, if you wanted to direct people to find you specifically, where might they do that?
You can find me on YouTube, Reset YT, or just Reset, I guess, Reset YT on Twitter, or just Reset REESET on YouTube. Haven't posted anything in a while. I'm working on it.
You're probably you're cooking up something Pikmin related, ain't you?
Yeah, possibly. There's plenty of stuff I've done on Forever Classics YouTube, so it's on there. If you want to see anything I've done recently, it's probably on there or on the website.
And if you ever need help with like a voiceover for a quote or something, like how the gaming historian gets it, you know where I'm at. I'll happily help you out on your channel too.
All right, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, put that in your pocket for later. But yeah, so if you all enjoyed this, give us a holler. It's a brand new show. We wanted to dedicate a lot of time to specific titles, and so if you like that, let us know. It's something we'd like to continue doing, as long as people vibe with it. That's kind of the plan at the moment. And we just like talking about things that don't have an embargo, that we don't have to like rush order. So yeah, that's it for this episode of the Grand Electric Archives. I'm Alex McCumbers. This has been Reese, and we will catch you in the next one. And you're welcome to visit us again in the future. Stay cool.